Hello again everybody, I'm Pastelist Avon Waters, and today's video is about creating textures using various materials in order to create a different surface rather than just a sanded surface or the regular pastel surface. Now, texture is very difficult to work with when you're working with pastels, but it has a purpose. So let's talk about today what those purposes are and how to different textures. My demo will show you the different textures and how they react to pastel. You'll have to do your own experimenting to get the feel of it because, as I say, it's a very individual sort of thing, but texture can add a lot of interest and creativity to regular pastel painting. So let's get on with it. To start with, I'm just using a synthetic brush, a 1-inch brush, and I'm adding clear gesso to everything except for this bottom panel. This will be just a semi-smooth hard press drawing paper, probably about 140, 150 weight drawing paper. It will take up pastel just with the tooth that's in it. But I'm going to tip in some gesso for the rest of it, and then on top of that gesso we will add other textures and materials. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this kind of middle aqua color so that when I create textures and with my studio lighting it'll be a little easier for you to see. So I'm going to tone some gesso because there's a couple products I'm going to use, such as the open acrylic medium gloss gel, that we need to add the clear gesso, which has pumice in it, so that when it dries we'll have something that will accept the pastels for the later part of this demonstration. So I'm going to add that, and we'll be able to then to see the different effects more easily and the textures that we build up with the various mediums. Okay, I am using this chip brush. You can see it's got some uneven edges. It's not like the synthetic white or yellow talon type brush that I used to put the clear gesso on in the beginning. So it will give us highs and low ridges as we paint across this. Again, this is nothing. This is just the drawing paper. This is the gesso, and now I'm putting on a layer of gesso, the clear gesso that has the pumice, putting a layer on, and you'll be able to see a little bit better some of the ridges and things that this uneven brush leaves. When I get to the point where we are going to cover these things, I'm going to try to do some blending in between, because the next one's going to be gesso and another material added to it. I think we'll start with the acrylic gel on the next one. So you'll be able to see all the different textures once we let this dry, and we'll pretend that this is a sky, and it won't be very successful because we have so many textures, but you'll be able to see a little bit of the difference in how you'll get different effects if you were painting a sky or a body of water. Now, I just happen to have golden open medium. This could be any sort of medium, acrylic medium. It could be much more liquid than this. This is very runny. I can't tip it up. Some of these gel mediums they'll stay put, and you can tip it up and show the camera. But I'm going to mix some of this with the gesso, and I'm just going to mix it in the gesso with the color, and I will add that next to here. And I can tell you just by adding, I'm going to blend some of these edges and try to keep a little bit of separation there so you'll be able to see it when we add color. I'll put a dark color over this so that you'll be able to see the skips and jumps and the lighter aqua color go underneath. We'll pretend that I'm painting some clouds across or water. We don't know what it will be. It'll probably be a mess because there's so many different textures. But I can tell you that this has a little bit more brush work. The brush, as I move the brush across here, it is not dissolving or falling down as much. So it stays up with this acrylic gel just a little bit higher, not a whole lot higher. as if it was a stiff gel or a paste. Next, I'm going to add this. You can see I probably am a fan of golden, but no particular reason other than they just seem to have a lot of variation and a lot of products for acrylics that work well with wet pastel medium. So this is a golden hard molding paste. It has no grit in it, so again I have to mix it with the tinted materials that I have here. And so I'm just going to add it. So this will now have the clear gesso, and it will have the golden medium gloss acrylic. I'm sorry, I said earlier that was a gel, but it's not. And so now we're going to add the hard molding paste, and we will definitely get ridges with this. No particular measurement here. It's just enough that when I mix it with all that gesso that I will be able to keep some peaks, and I can apply it actually either with a brush or I can apply it with a palette knife. So if there's space here, I might try both. We just add that, we mix it in, we'll get some color variation added to it, and that gesso is diluting its stiffness, but we'll still be able to apply it in a manner that gives us some texture. Look at that. You can see how that's going on. And I'll just put a little bit up in here, and you can see we get some nice, I use this a lot in my skies and my highlight areas. I was an oil painter, and getting this texture on there, look at that, it's just like painting with a palette knife, or if when I use the brush, painting with a brush and leaving impasto in our areas. See, there's the brush, so I'm putting the palette knife up in here, I'm putting the brush marks down in here to join the last section. But again, I can get nice peaks in there and leave those brush strokes. I'm a little more fake than I would if I was actually doing a painting, but you can see that putting the brush down, you get some good peaks out of that. Next is this golden coarse pumice gel. They also make one, and I have a jar of it here, that is just golden pumice, and it has a much thinner texture to it. This pumice is very, very highly textured, and I usually only use this on large paintings in the highlight areas where I want just a little texture, and I certainly don't use it all over the painting. Not to say you couldn't. If you find something that you want to experiment with, and you have the ability to work with this, I usually always mix it with some clear gesso so it'll flow a little bit more, and as I scatter it about, it can be applied with a palette knife, it can be applied with a roller. That last could be applied with a roller too. And I've applied it with palette knives, rollers, and brushes, and even my fingers in places. But when you add this much texture, you can get a feel for, as I move that in the light, for how much texture is there. But when you put that on there, it is really leaving a big, thick surface. And we'll put a little bit up in there, and then I'll use the brush to come out in there, and I'm going to blend it just a little bit, see if we can, in this center section, we can get a sense of how our pastels change as we go over some of these areas. But you can see the shadows and how much texture is in there. I had a 36 by, no, I'm sorry, it was a 29 by 40 piece that was stolen in transit, that was in an exhibition in California, and it had areas in the highlight areas, it had some of this all across there. Now I'll paint it on there, and as I paint it, it is feathering out some of these edges. So if you're going to use this stuff and you're not going to use it all over the painting, then you will probably want to come in to where it's thickest and feather it out. Otherwise you'll end up with just a little patch that looks way too rough in comparison to the areas around it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to come in here and we're going to feather into there. I probably on a bigger painting would eventually feather out with just clear gesso, and there might be a few of these little granules that get stuck in the brush as I feather it on out to the blend it with the rest of the texture that is surrounding this supposedly light area. Again, as an oil painter, or acrylic painter also, you find that you use thicker paint for your highlights, and as an oil painter taking up pastel, I wanted to see if I could simulate that, and this is how I discovered I could do it. I could create some depth and some more interest in some of the broader areas on larger paintings. So that's it. We're going to let this dry, and then we will go over this and show you how the pastel is applied. When you apply pastel to this much texture, it is very difficult to work with this much texture, but you get some amazing results when you layer it and you get different light and shadow effects off of that. While that dries, I'm going to take you to a painting that is about 20 years old, and I'm going to try to show you. This is an oil painting that I did years and years and years ago, but you can see here I laid in the bark of this sycamore with a palette knife. And I'll go to the side here so you can see that there's big broad areas of the palette knife with raised paint. And then in some of these clouds you can see some of the brushwork and palette knife work in those clouds. And that's what we're trying to simulate with a dry medium like pastel by using these textures. These are advanced wet pastel techniques using this much texture and this coarse gesso and some of these acrylic blends. They can be used at the beginning of paintings, but typically this is added after the painting structure is already down on the page. Like if I was doing, I put this picture of clouds up here because here's an area of highlights that if I was doing this, I would put some of these heavy textures into there. Again, to repeat, typically this size of a painting, this is too much texture. I might just go with the gesso with the harsh brush, or the acrylic gels that have texture and pumice in them, but not the coarse that I have up here. I save that for larger paintings. But let's show you what happens. Okay, I'm going to use kind of a bluish tint since we put the turquoise underneath. The turquoise, again, was to help you see the texture when the light in a video here goes across this. You can see how heavily textured that is. And I'm just going to run this from the bottom, which, remember, this part down here was just plain paper. It had nothing on it. And then we had the gesso, and the gesso is clear gesso, and you can see how easy that piece of white drawing paper took up the texture and the color of this pastel, because it is probably close to about a 400 grit when you brush it on with that synthetic brush. And this is the gesso with the brush that comes from the hardware that isn't cut off at the ends. It's what we call a chip brush. And then this is the gesso with the gel. These two are very similar. This has a little bit more. You can see the skips and jumps. This is the tooth of the paper causing the white to show through. This is the tooth of the gesso causing the white to go through. And see, I can blend and cover these whites up. So it's very manageable just with fingers or small blending tools, stumps. But you get into the brush, the chip brush that had the acrylic medium, gloss medium on it, and I added the gesso to that. Now we're getting more skips and jumps. You can see maybe you can see some of that turquoise underpainting come through. So if this was an underpainting that you gessoed over using the brush, you would still get some of that underpainting coming through. If this was just the gesso, you could easily cover the underpainting, but the thinner you apply your pastel to the just the clear gesso, the more skips and jumps you have. And if this was an underpainting instead of white paper, you could see the colors that you applied first underneath. This is Wet Pastel Techniques and the advantages of adding texture to your paintings. You can layer easily the more texture you have. And you can see just with a little light application, I'm getting some skips and jumps there. Then this is with the acrylic gel. This is with the coarser ground. Now I'm really getting, I'm going to put a little darker pastel up in here so you can see this better. This is close to the same value as the turquoise, so let me switch to a dark pastel and you'll see how the turquoise would come through with this texture. We'll come over here. Now you can see the paper by itself, just a light application of pastel, so you could layer in your traditional layering with just plain paper. When you get into the gesso with the pumice, the clear gesso, you can see a little bit of the turquoise coming through. If I don't press too hard, you can see the turquoise and the blue that I put in there coming through. So the texture gives you the ability to layer, and in larger pieces this all comes together and makes the painting more interesting. Here's with the chip brush. I'm going over the blue and the turquoise, and you can see the underpainting. Now these aren't compatible colors, but I'm trying to illustrate, I'm trying to show you how an underpainting that is in the same color family and you put another color over it that is compatible, you will get different effects. And then here's the coarse gesso. And now we're going to go up into here, and you can see that a light application up in this area is really, really difficult. I'm going to switch back to the color that's more compatible with this turquoise. And this is really grinding down this pastel. So when you get this much texture, now when you just have the gel texture, you get more ability to just use the pastel over the acrylic gel and clear gesso in these areas. And you still get some areas where the underpainting would be coming in. But when you get this much texture, you can't really apply the pastel in the same manner. You have to do something different. Okay, I put this flat on a flat surface. Working on a flatter surface, the pastel stays there and you can move it around before you blow it off. And I'm going to tilt this so you can see some of the texture. And if I was building some of those cloud forms on a larger piece, you can put down the colors that are going to help you do some blending and create more realistic cloud forms. Clouds are darker in this reference photograph. And again, the pipe insulation or the brayer, I'm getting some really nice layering where you can see right in here there's a little bit of that violet comes up into those oranges. So the heavier the texture, the more you have to adapt by deciding when is it when is it time to lay the piece flat? Now all I've got to do is tip this up and tap it a couple times, and the excess will come off, but I will have had the pastel there rather than when I had it vertical you noticed it wasn't sticking. And a little lighter color could go in here up against those gray violets. And down in here we don't have as much texture. We use different techniques, but you can see you can start to build a cloud mass similar to what is in this photo reference. That's the advantage of using textures in pastels. Using wet pastel techniques will give you a chance to do more layering than you can just with a single tooth that your paper comes with or your pastel panel. I hope that you've enjoyed that pastel wet process that occurs later in some of the more advanced painting techniques. These wet pastel techniques add more layering, more texture. You get the more texture you have, the more you can lay down multiple colors in the same color, analogous family, and the painting takes up a lot more interest in those areas. So until next time, if you're enjoying these demonstrations and these tutorials, please hit the subscribe button and definitely hit the like button so more people will see this video, and we'll see you with a different topic next week. Bye-bye.